Good evening and welcome to Quorum. I'm Wilson Stribling. Our topic tonight, public education, impacts millions of Mississippians. It accounts for billions of dollars in state and federal funding every year, and its results in Mississippi are a mixed bag, frankly. The state's teachers are making progress with the school children in their care, but there's a long way to go before the job of improving Mississippi's education is complete. When we talk about Mississippi's K-12 education system, it's important to understand its scale and its reach across our state. The Department of Education oversees 152 districts encompassing 1,089 schools. 492,000 Mississippi children attend these schools. There are more than 33,000 full-time teachers, providing a student-to-teacher ratio of 14.7. Almost 70% of the students attend Title I schools, which get extra federal funding. 68% of children are eligible for free or reduced lunches at their school. The legislature will spend almost $5.5 billion in fiscal year 2012, and the Department of Education will get 41% of that, $2,262 million. By some accounts, it will need every penny of that and more. The journal Education Week publishes an annual nationwide survey called Quality Counts. The latest report gives Mississippi an overall grade of C- for its efforts in education last year. That's 6 points below the national average. The state also scores lower than U.S. averages in the National Assessment of Educational Progress. The Department of Education is asking lawmakers for $2.6 billion in total state funding, but the joint legislative budget recommendation calls for less than $2.3 billion. It would keep funding for Mississippi's adequate education program at the same level as last year's budget, but that would mean less than full funding for the complex budget formula designed to ensure adequate budgeting for our public school system. Senators and representatives in Jackson have yet to decide whether to approve that early blueprint for education spending. They also have to consider issues like charter schools, sex-related education, and tax holidays for school supply purchases. But there's early agreement across the aisle. The job of supporting and educating our school children remains one of Mississippi's top priorities. We will discuss these issues and more on tonight's program. Our guests, Representative Cecil Brown chairs the House Education Committee. He's a Democrat representing Hinds County. House Education Committee member Kimberly Campbell is with us. She's a Democrat representing Hinds and Madison counties. Tollison is the Democratic vice chairman of the Senate Education Committee. He represents the people of Lafayette, Tallahatchie, and Yalobusha counties. And from Madison and Rankin counties, Republican Senator Lee Yancey is here. He also serves on the Senate Education Committee. We thank you all for your time tonight, and of course, we want you to join the conversation as well. Our toll-free phone line is now open. Dial 1-877-405-5247 with your questions for our guests. That number again, 1-877-405-5247. You can also email your questions to us to quorum@mpbonline.org. We'll get to as many of those as we can during our time this evening. You can also join the discussion on Twitter. Just add the hashtag Quorum to your comment and follow us at twitter.com/mpbonline. So we mentioned the joint legislative budget recommendation, and we know that both House and Senate, both the House and the Senate are making their way through the actual appropriation bills for the education and other agencies and programs. So, Chairman Brown, let me start with you. Are House members sticking with the joint budget recommendation for education?
Yes. As a matter of fact, we passed the appropriation bill today for education, for K-12 education, and we level funded the Mississippi Adequate Education Program, MAP. We added $16 million for the retirement contribution for teachers that would have to be absorbed by the districts if we did not do that. But other than that, it's level funded, and we recommended what the Legislative Budget Committee recommended.
Mr. Tollison, how much do you think the Senate will propose for K-12 education in fiscal 2012?
Well, I hope at a minimum it would be the budget recommendation, but you got to look at it in the bigger picture. This is still $200 million less than what the MAEP requires. So to say level funding is not necessarily an accurate statement. I mean, we're providing what was provided last year, and there's some questions about that. But over the past 3 years, I think we've underfunded education under the MAEP formula by several $100 million. And it's had an impact on our schools across the state. Teachers have been laid off, students have had to go into bigger classrooms, programs have had to be eliminated. But all that being said, I hope that we can provide as much funding as we can, even at the budget recommendation level, or even a little more if we can get that. So at least to hold the line right now, given our recession and our revenues are starting to come in and they're at least level, and you're providing a little more money than we had in the past. So I'm hopeful that we can provide money to maintain what we have in our schools.
Well, as the four of you are aware, last year the federal government sent the states millions of dollars as part of an education jobs program, and Governor Haley Barbour wants to apply $65 million of that money to the state's 2012 education budget. He says it'll free up state funds for other programs, and we asked Sam Bounds with the State Association of School Superintendents for his reaction to that plan.
That $65 million is federal money that's already been given to the districts. And now we're talking about using funds, and we were encouraged by the governor's office to hold that money in reserve until this year to use it. And now all of a sudden the $65 million is serving three purposes. It's to reinstate what we had this year, it's to maintain to establish next year, but it's also to be taken away to put in the state funding formula this year. So the $65 million scares us. The $65 million was promised to the districts, it was given to the districts, and now we're taking federal money, as I understand it, and I'm not the smartest person, but as I understand it, we're taking $65 million of federal money to put in a state appropriations formula for state funds. And I don't see that being germane to use federal money to prop up the state budget when the state MAEP is a state obligation to provide proper funding for all districts.
Now, Senate Appropriations Chairman Doug Davis has said he agrees with the governor's proposal. So, Senator Yancey, what are your views on this federal funding?
Well, I mean, first let me say, as a parent of two children in public school, and my mother being a retired public school teacher, public schools are near and dear to my heart, and I want to see as much money as possible dedicated to public schools this year that is fiscally responsible. And what that number is subject to interpretation. And so we'll be talking in the Senate and in the House as to what that number is. And I think before it's over with, we'll come to a number. But we do want to see our schools get as much money as possible.
Representative Buck, to you now. What are your views on this, the use of this federal funding as part of the education budget?
Well, I too am a product of the Jackson public school system. My father has taught for 40 years in the public school system, so I understand public education quite well. I would like to see this money continue to go towards our education. I don't think it needs to be spent into the state fund. We need to send this to help fund MAEP, because as we just said, we're still not putting enough money into MAEP as we should, and our public schools are suffering. So I would like to see more money into any of our public school education programs.
Will we ever get to a point where we fully fund MAEP, and is it necessary to get to that point?
Well, I mean, we passed a law saying that we're supposed to do this in 1996. Cecil and I were here, and that's our obligation as legislators to the school children across the state. So I think we should, and I think constitutionally we probably have an obligation as legislators to do it. And certainly that hasn't happened yet. We've been able to avoid litigation that's occurred in most every other state. I hope we don't get to that point, but if we continue to underfund it, it might occur. And but yes, we have an obligation to the school children of this state. We said, as a matter of law, you should fund at this level. And we had experts come in several times to say, here's how you get to it. And we set a base student cost of, right now, I think about $4,900 per student of each student across the state. And nobody's ever proven that's not working right. And if they do, well, I'd like to listen to them. But I believe in data-driven, evidence-based formula, and that is what it is. And we've yet to fully fund it. I think we did it maybe one time several years ago. Yeah. But it still continues. And again, that is evidence-based program, or in terms of saying we use these numbers to determine it, and nobody's come back and say this doesn't work. So until they do that, I think we ought to fully fund it like the legislature said we should.
All right, well, House and Senate leaders hear plenty of calls every year in favor of more spending for public education. Last week, Derek Johnson, president of the Mississippi NAACP, held a news conference to highlight the group's legislative agenda, and education funding is a big part of that agenda.
Education is the key for the success of this state. It is the key for us to recruit businesses, but unfortunately, the governor and the Senate has not found fit to make education a priority, and we're calling on them to make education a priority.
And earlier this week, the Legislative Black Caucus called for full funding of the Mississippi Adequate Education Program, MAEP. So, Representative Buck, why is that important? How realistic is that goal in 2012?
Well, I pray that it's realistic, but it's important because if we're concerned about economic development in our state, if we're concerned about getting Mississippi off of the bottom, then we've got to be concerned about education. We cannot just feel as though we can move this state forward when we have children that are in classrooms and there are no books. We still have some schools and some districts to where they can't even take books home. That in itself lets you know where we're going wrong. It's also important if we're concerned about crime. You hear people always say, I'm concerned about crime, I'm concerned about my neighborhoods. It all begins with education. Until we get back to the roots of understanding that we've got to educate our populace, we've also got to increase our workforce training in our populace, we are always going to be behind in economic development because we'll bring in industry, but who can work there? We have to bring in workers from other states. And that's just, that's a shame. So I think if we're concerned about our citizens here, and if we're concerned about moving us forward, then we've got to be focused on public education.
Senator Yancey, what's your reaction to the NAACP's criticism of the Senate and of the governor on education funding?
I think that you'll see, if you look over the last number of years, you'll see that the education funding has increased over the last number of years. And, I don't disagree with anything that anyone has said here today about the importance of public education. I firmly and believe that with all my heart. But, we have been through the worst economic times in my lifetime. In the last couple of years, and there's a simple fact is when sales tax revenues are down, we don't have the projected budget that we thought we were going to have. We don't have the money that's come in, and so there have been cuts made across the board. And when cuts are made, people get a smaller slice of the pie than they thought they were going to get. And with the amount of money that public education does get, it's just nigh on impossible to cut everything else and not cut education. So, what's happened over the last several years, in my opinion, in the Senate is not so much that there is this anti-public education sentiment out there, but it's that we just haven't had the money come in that we hoped would come in, and we've been basically responding to the economic crisis that we've been through.
Representative Brown, do you agree with that?
I agree with that. I'm disappointed that we've not been able to fund MAP at the full level. We've done that one time, as Senator Tollison said. Money's not the only answer, but money's an important part of the answer. We've done a lot of good things in education over the last 10, 12 years. I'm very proud of some of the things that we've done, most of the things that we've done. The one thing I'm not satisfied with is funding, but as Senator Yancey said, we don't have enough money. I mean, we've cut $500 million out of the state general fund over the last 4 years. $500 million. That's 10% of the budget. And 62% of the budget is education in one form or another. There's no way to cut $500 million out of a $5 billion budget without touching education. And nobody has had the appetite to raise taxes. The only answer has been, like at the federal level, either cut spending or you raise taxes, and there has not been an appetite to raise taxes during the middle of an economic recession. So it's been tough times. We're trying to struggle through it, but there is no question people have been hurt. School districts have been hurt. We've laid off teachers. We've lost 800 teachers last year. We've lost 2,000 state school employees last year as a result of the cuts that we've made. And it's, school districts have been hurt. There's no doubt about it. And we can't sustain that for much longer.
Let me say something about raising taxes. The reality is taxes have been raised across the state in the form of property taxes. The legislature sits out over here and washes their hands and says, oh, okay, we can't do it. But it goes back home to our city council, board of aldermen, our supervisors, and the schools make a request and they raise the property taxes. So property owners across the state have seen an increase across the state in their property taxes as a result of the failure of the legislature to provide funding. So we have a choice. We can sit here and wash our hands as a legislature, so we've been good, no taxes have been raised, but in reality we cause taxes to be raised back home on property owners. And, you know, it's a choice we make. And if it continue this way, I guess we can continue not to fund education like we're doing, and property taxes will continue to go up, and we'll have higher property taxes. One of the great things about this state is we have low property taxes. But if we keep going down the road we're going down, we're going to have higher property taxes, and it's going to be a hurt economic development and other things like that.
So are you suggesting that taxes should be raised on the state level?
We should look at what we've got, the money, and make a priority for it. I think that it is what we've done with education right now. We've got 1,000 less teachers. That means bigger classrooms. You're going to see in 5 years from now, you're going to see our test scores go down, I predict. They've been incrementally going up over the past 10 years.
Because of the funding issue.
Absolutely. I think it is have an impact. We've eliminated programs across this state. It's going to have an impact. The choices we make are going to have an impact on our schools and our students.
91 school districts this year raised property taxes. 91 out of 151 school districts raised property taxes. I was driving over here tonight. My granddaughter was in the car. Her math class in the 8th grade has 33 kids in the class. They've got kids standing in the classroom who don't have desks. They stand up during the classroom because they've had to consolidate, and they have fewer teachers and they have more kids, and they don't have enough room for the kids. That's what's going on around the state.
We have an email question now, and this is a question that I, as a journalist, have been asked over the years a number of times, so I'd be interested in your input here. Julia from Ocean Springs writes, I've always heard that taxes from the casinos on the coast were going to education, but the education budget is always being cut. The casinos seem to be doing pretty well. What has happened to all of that money?
We get about $153 million in casino taxes. So, and during the 90s, it did help. We helped with teacher pay. It helped with more funding for education, and certainly that's had an impact on education. As Cecil said, 62% of the budget is K through 12 and university colleges. So it certainly has helped.
But it's only 5 to 10% of the education budget, and so it's just not enough money.
Well, I was in the governor's office in 1991 when the law was passed for casinos, and people have sort of faulty memories about that. It was never sold as being dedicated to education. People think that's what happened at that time, and everybody said at that time, and the governor didn't push that, by the way. That was something that came out of the legislature. But what was happening was the legislature was saying this will help with education, and people translated that into saying this will be dedicated to education. It's never been dedicated to education.
It seems like there was this sense that this could be a cure-all for a lot of things. If we open up to this brand new industry that generates so much money, we won't have any more problems after this, and here we are, and we talk about the same thing, it seems, every year.
Same thing happened with the alcohol tax back whenever they passed that. You know, the same thing with legalization of alcohol. Everybody assumed it was going to help, and a lot of people who were trying to push the passage of the bills were saying this is going to really be help with education, but it was never dedicated to education. It just didn't happen that way.
But it was sold to the people like that, I think.
And a lot of people sold it that way.
I think that it was
Who
sold
voted
to the
on
people
it
like that,
that
it was going to be such a funding mechanism for public education. I think many people that probably would not have been for the casinos coming would not have done so if it were not for it being tied to education.
You know, I think that during that time, I guess it's late 80s, I'm thinking about there was talk about a lottery, and many times lotteries are tied to public education the way they are in Georgia and other places, and you know, the lottery didn't materialize, and
it certainly helps get them passed.
In my view, thank goodness we don't have a lottery, but I think the idea that the money would go towards education was transferred to the idea of casinos.
And let me say this about the money. I mean, the money is important, but we do have to be smarter because we're limited in our resources. But the problem is you have 33,000 teachers across the state, and that's the biggest, salaries are the biggest part of that budget, and we need to make sure the money does go to the classroom. We've cut classroom supplies. I mean, money comes out of our teachers' pocket across the state to help pay for paper and things like that. My sister's a teacher, you know, I've got friends who are teachers, and they tell me that. I mean, we used to provide about $500 or $600 for classroom supplies. Now it's down to $200. And so I believe in making sure we spend that money in a wise manner, but at the same time we got to pay the teachers, and we're $6,000 below the southeastern average now. We were moving close to it, but we're moving back now. And
we have a caller on the line now with a question. Joan from Madison. Joan, go ahead with your question, please.
Well, my question is, if revenues are down and we don't have any money, we can't fund education, we can't pay Medicaid, how can we build museums? dumbest thing I've ever heard of.
I assume she's referring in particular to the one that's been talked about at the Capitol lately, the Civil Rights Museum in Mississippi. Who wants to take that one?
Well, I think we're dealing with apples and oranges a little bit with that one. The Civil Rights Museum is also part of economic development. It would also bring money into our state from tourism dollars, which is a huge industry for us. So I don't think we can get to the point of saying because we have issues in other areas, we've got to completely not deal with the Civil Rights Museum. That's something a little bit separate. And we've been dealing with that. I think we passed that, well, not we, I wasn't there then, but the Civil Rights Museum was passed, what, 10, 12 years ago to do such a thing, and so it's taken this long for us to even get to this point. So I think it's time, it's past time. You have civil rights museums in Alabama and South Carolina that do quite well. They bring a lot of revenue dollars into those states, and so I think our state needs one.
And so the idea is that if you spend the money on something like that, what you're saying, if I hear you right, is that it will spend some money now to bring in a lot more money in the future. Exactly. In the form of the economic development. We have another caller on the line, James in Jackson. James, go ahead with your question, please. James, are you there? We'll try to get back to James in just a moment. Let's take a look now at the Department of Education's own accountability ratings. Only 40% of Mississippi's 152 school districts earned ratings of successful or better in 2009. The rest were rated as failing, at risk of failing, or low performing, or placed on academic watch. Last year, 51% of districts had earned successful or better ratings. These rankings are based on assessment tests, student growth, and graduation rates. This is only the second year that MDE has graded itself on these new, tougher accountability standards. So, Representative Brown, are you encouraged by the standards and the results so far?
I am encouraged by the fact that we are ratcheting up the bar, that we're moving the bar up, that I think everybody in the education community understands that we are now approaching the national average in terms of standards, not in terms of performance, but standards. We have had some of the lowest performance standards in the country for forever, and we've not measured ourselves appropriately. That's why our national scores on the National Association of Education Process, the NAEP scores, NAEP scores have been so low. We have now moved our standards up. It's going to be tough. It's very hard to move from here to there all at one time, but we are making progress, and I am encouraged by what we're doing.
Senators, let me pose this one to you. We learned this week that Senator Thad Cochran, U.S. Senator Thad Cochran, will be part of the effort to rewrite the federal No Child Left Behind law. What impact do you think that law has had on Mississippi?
Well,
go ahead.
I think that it has probably been a burden to a certain extent. We've had our own accountability standards for the state. We've had them before No Child Left Behind. So it's an additional requirement. I know that a lot of our folks at the State Department have complained about it and our local school districts. But I do think our standards in terms of measuring the performance of our students, we've got it at a good level. They are tough, but we need to do that. I mean, our students are not only competing with children against Alabama and California, Texas, they're competing against Thailand and Bangladesh and China and India, because guess what? Manufacturing jobs are going more offshore than they are in the state. So it's important that we raise the standards for the students. They're making progress. They're going in the right direction, but we've got a tough road to hoe in trying to get folks up to the standards. And I know the State Department has some goals that they want to meet. One is with the graduation. We want to make sure that students graduate. And, you know, not everybody wants to go or needs to go to college, but we also need to provide workforce training and vocational avenues for people as well. So,
Senator Yancey?
I think the intention of No Child Left Behind was good intention. Many times I heard teachers complain that they were just having to teach to the test, and that students were basically learning the answers to a test and then not really retaining the knowledge. And I think what we need is more practical application that will last beyond just one examination. And you know, I'm happy about the workforce training and the fact that we're working towards providing another avenue for students who don't go to college to learn a trade or to find a way to be productive, you know, in society. And I think it's our job as legislators to continue talking about the issue and talking about the problems, and whether we agree or disagree on the numbers or the philosophy, the more we can look each other in the eye and talk about what needs to happen, at some point we're going to come together. And you know, I'm excited about the fact that Republicans and Democrats are working together, and you know, we're one Mississippi. This is not us and them. This is all of us. And if the least of these don't have the same opportunity for education, then we'll never get off the bottom. And so it's incumbent upon us to give everybody a hand up.
All right. Well, when the Education Department presented its 2012 budget request to lawmakers, it identified 3 strategic goals for the years ahead. They are to ensure that all students pass the 3rd grade reading at a 3rd grade level by the year 2020, to reduce the school dropout rate to 13% by 2013, and to reach the national average on national assessments by that same year, 2013. Those are substantial goals. Right now, the state ranks near the bottom in the National Assessment of Educational Progress, and our dropout rate at last check was almost 17%. So, Senator Yancey, do you think these are reasonable education goals given the timeframes involved there?
Well, that leaves us a couple of years to get it accomplished.
We're getting close.
I think, you know, I think setting the bar high is good. Whenever I have set the bar high for my children, they seem to rise to the occasion and will go farther than they would have. If they don't reach the goal, they go farther than they would have had the goal not been set. So I think it's good to have these goals, and you know, I look forward to seeing the children of Mississippi, you know, learn and to grow from these. And
Representative Buck, there's a bipartisan push for support to expand workforce training, which we talked about a little bit, at the college and university levels. It's directly tied to our economic development efforts. Are Mississippi's K-12 schools doing well enough in preparing kids for that training and for higher education efforts, do you think?
Right now, I don't think so. I think that's a big push. I think that's where we need to begin. I think because every child is not going to be college bound. So I think when a child graduates from high school, if they're not college bound, I still want them to be prepared to go into a trade of some sort, because everyone should be self-sufficient. So I think we need to kind of scale back and not even wait until the junior college level or after the 12th year, but really start some of those programs before then to get them ready, to get them prepared, so that when it comes to that graduation, they can decide if they're going to the left or going to the right, but they'll be prepared.
They got to go somewhere.
They got to go somewhere, because we want them to be self-sufficient. We want them to be self-sufficient. We want them to tie back into the community. We want them to drive our workforce in any way possible.
All right. We have another caller on the line now, Anthony from Jackson. Anthony, what's your question, please?
Yes, I wanted to know, why is at these schools is gyms being built and things of that nature, and not books going into the schools?
All right, construction on school campuses. Are we talking about 2 different funding streams when you see construction going on at a school, when you've got these other issues that seem to be more pertinent?
You're talking about local decisions. You're talking about a decision that's made at the local level. We have home rule for schools, and you've got a local board there that makes a decision about how the money will be spent within the school district, as long as it's in accordance with the law. And I've got the same issues. I think everybody has the same issues about how local districts spend money, but those choices are made at the local level.
Well, teachers earn a lot of recognition for having one of the nation's most challenging jobs. As we've talked about here this evening to some degree, they're not always highly paid for that job. The average salary for teachers in Mississippi is a little over $42,000 a year. The Southeast average is $6,000 more than that, and the national average is $55,000. Of course, teachers with less experience earn much less than that. So, Representative Brown, back to you. Is Mississippi able to attract the best teachers based on those numbers you see right there?
Well, we have an issue with the quantity of teachers and the quality of teachers, not the quality of the people who are in the teaching profession, but the quality of their training in many instances. We have teachers, we have plenty of people who are in the teaching profession, but in many instances they're not trained as well as they should be. Let me put it that way. So we have some issues with teachers. Part of it's salary, part of it's other issues.
One of our viewers, we have another email from a lady named Carrie, writes, It seems to me that education cuts should be made at the top, not in the budgets of individual schools. How do you expect the standards to be met when there are not enough teachers to teach classrooms with way too many students? Who wants to take that?
Well, I think that she made a point that is absolutely right. We're cutting education, but yet we're raising the standards. So we're telling teachers, yeah, you're going to have a bigger classroom, you're going to have, fewer resources, but yet you're going to have to meet these tough standards we've established. Boy, that's a tough situation to be in, and it is harder. And that's what I'm saying. It's a catch-22 situation for these folks, being in that difficult, taking away their resources, but yet requiring tougher standards. Is that fair? I don't know. I don't think it is. And so we've got to be vigilant about what we're doing with education and the funding. And I'm not, like I said, money's not the everything, but it's certainly a big part of it, and it is up to local school districts. My community in Oxford, we passed a $30 million bond issue. It passed 67% of the vote. That was a choice of the local people to decide whether to build a new high school up there. It didn't have anything to do with the state. So if we want to do that in our community, that's our business. And we chose to do that. I mean, our Oxford, Lafayette County have some of the best schools in the state, and it's because of our community. It has nothing to do with money. And if you look around this state where there are good schools, you're going to have strong support from the community. We can't make that happen. That's up to local individual parents and businesses in that community to make that happen. They want to have good schools. They, one, need to go to the schools. I wonder how many people get to their schools and visit and see what's going on in there. If they want people to be accountable, they ought to go into their school district. I can tell you, generally speaking, that's what the case is. If you got a community that supports their schools, they probably have a very good school district with good test scores, and things are happening there.
Absolutely.
So.
No question.
Representative Buck, I heard you nodding in agreement to a lot of what he said. It's about local support, parental involvement.
Local support, parental involvement, community involvement. I think we've gotten away from that in some areas. I represent Hines and Madison, and of course my Madison districts are doing quite well. I'm very proud of them, but we're suffering a little bit in some of our Hines areas and some of our JPS areas. Not all the schools. I don't want to say the whole district, but we have some issues, and it's important, for the parents to be there. I hear all the time from teachers, whether it's the teachers at my own daughter's school, where they say they have some students there to where they never see the parent. No matter how many times they'll call them about something, no matter how many notices they send home. Well, that's a problem, because if you're not concerned, then that lets me know what's going to happen to that school in that area. That lets me know who's concerned about it, who's going to try to bring in extra resources, because some of that has to happen as well. I'm sure in Oxford, it's not just about that bond, but I'm sure the people in that community, when the school needs something, a little bit more tangible, they'll say, you know what, we'll raise the money. We'll get it there. We do the same thing at my daughter's school, Casey, but that does not happen at every school because of the community and the people not being as concerned about it as they should, and the parents not being involved as they should.
You can tell whether you've got a good school or not by going to a PTA meeting.
Exactly.
And seeing how many people are there, or going to a back to school night and look around the buildings and see if the buildings are clean, the parking lot's well kept, it's safe and orderly, and whether or not there are a lot of parents there. If you've got that, you got a good school. That's the way it's going to work out.
You are watching Quorum on MPB Television and mpbonline.org. We hope you'll call in with your questions. The toll-free phone number is 1-877-405-5247. You can also email us at quorum@mpbonline.org or follow us on Twitter. And if you're an educator, look for the Quorum page on our website, mpbonline.org, where we have an education resource and activity guide for your classroom use. And appropriate, since we're talking about education this evening, Representative Brown, one of the most controversial education topics has been the charter school option. A bill by Senator Michael Watson would allow more options for creating charter schools in districts across the state, and it's now in the hands of the House Education Committee. First off, what exactly is a charter school?
A charter school, there are lots of different definitions, but basically a charter school is a public school that is run by a private group, if you will, and it may be a church group, it may be a private organization, it may be a group of parents, but it's a public school that is outside the control, day-to-day control of the local school board or the state school board. That's really all it is. A charter is nothing more than a contract between one group. It may be a church group or a private organization, and either the school board or the state school board that operates the school. That's all it is.
So what's your reaction to Senator Watson's proposal?
Well, there are some problems with it, just technical problems with the bill. I've introduced charter school bills for 11 years in a row now, so I'm a proponent of charter schools. The problem in the House is we can't get it passed. We passed a charter school bill last year that I think is a good bill. It's really what's now called a parent trigger bill. It's actually pretty popular across the United States, but we passed that. It only allows the conversion of an existing public school into a charter school. And what Senator Watson's bill would do would be what's called a new startup charter school, which is a little bit different concept. I don't think the bill is going to pass the House. We don't have the votes over there. We've worked on it and worked on it. We've had committee meetings. I was a chairman of a committee that dealt with nothing but charter schools. We just don't have the votes to get it passed.
Representative Buck, what's your reaction to the bill?
I agree. Charter schools are a mixed bag for me. I was in agreement with Chairman Buck with the bill that we passed about the parent trigger charter school. I supported that bill. If we're talking about just, I don't know the parameters for beginning the charter school in this bill, but I have issues if we're going to start sending over some of our public funding to fund the charter schools. Because my belief is, if we can create a charter school that's going to be so successful, then why can't we do that in our schools that are already there? You know, I'm fine as far as doing a pilot program to maybe study to see what they're doing differently, but that's still not enough. It's not enough just to save a few students in one area when we have, what is it, how many districts and how many students? 151 districts. So having 5 or 10 charter schools that are successful is not enough. So whatever they're doing, if they can be so successful, then why can't we regenerate that in all our school districts?
There's also the argument, especially among folks who are opposed to charter schools, that they would drain money from conventional public schools. Senator Tollison, what do you think about that? Would they drain resources from existing public schools?
Well, I mean, there's an argument for that, but at the same time, it may create competition. I've had a chance to visit the KIPP schools in West Helena, Arkansas, twice actually. And it looks to me certainly like they're doing some good things. They had a report about the number of students who are going to college, and that's what it is a college prep school. And I know they want to establish somewhere in Coahoma County in Clarksdale, and are interested in this charter school. They're a privately, I don't know if it's a nonprofit, but yeah, nonprofit. The Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation is giving money to them. So I think some of these charter schools might actually attract money that we otherwise might not get, private money from across this country. I believe, look, if a school is failing, let's try something different, because we're failing that child when that school is failing. Let's give somebody else another opportunity, and as long as it's monitored, and it would be under these bills, the State Board of Education, the local school board would have some say into how they're operated. But let's give it a chance and see if it works, because what's going on in some of these school districts is not working. I mean, 6 school districts have been taken over by the state across from top to bottom. That's not good, and let's give it a chance. And I believe that some of these should work, and then you can focus on certain things like music and art academies, things that maybe kids are interested in focusing on that. So I wish we could get a good workable bill everybody could get agreement on and see what happens. But unfortunately, you haven't been able to get any good legislation where you can actually get some charter schools in Mississippi.
Senator Yancey, what do you think about charter schools?
I'm a big fan of the charter school concept. I'm a fan of Senator Watson's bill. He's put many hours into it. And I think more school choice rather than less is what we need. We've got more than half of our schools that are underperforming, at least. And students who are affluent can vote with their feet. Their parents can just move and go somewhere else. It's the poor kids, middle-income kids, like I was, who are left behind. And the idea that these charter schools are taking away, I think is not the way I would frame it. I see them as providing a great choice for parents and for students, for them to have an opportunity that maybe they didn't have back at their old school. The superintendent of education still has the authority to put these charter schools on probation, still has the authority to revoke their charter if they don't meet a certain criteria. And while the state portion of MAEP funds does follow the child, the local portion of funds, which the way Senator Watson explained it to me, was that more of the funds would stay behind at the old school with those students gone, and the local part would follow. And in some cases, the school that was left behind would have more funds than they had to start with because they had less students. And I really would like to see areas of our state that are struggling. I would like to see those parents have another choice. And I am against cherry picking. I am not trying to make this any kind of anything people are scared of. I just want kids to have a chance. I want them to have an opportunity to excel in an environment where they can. And it just may be that in some of these places, the restrictions that are placed on them or the environment they're in, something is keeping them from excelling. And I'd like to see these kids have another chance. I believe charter schools are part of the answer to this problem.
We have a caller on the line now with a question. David is calling from Pontotoc. David, go ahead with your question, please.
Yeah, I am 71. My wife is 65. I'm going to make this real quick. Our taxes on the house jumped from $500 and something this time to $1,100 and something. And I call the supervisor over it, and they tell me that this is because of the school system. So here we are, sending our kids to schools at 65 and 71, and now they're running our taxes up $400 to support the Pontotoc schools, and this never happened. So that was what the gentleman pointed out a while ago. The taxes, they didn't increase them, but they're being increased in all the counties to try to maintain the schools. And I'm all for the schools. I want the schools to go ahead and move forward. But you know, when you're 65 and 71 and you're going from a good job to limited income on Social Security, and you're going to pay $300 to $400 extra on your land taxes on a house in 0.64 acres. In other words, less than just a shade over half acre. Something's wrong. And this whole area people are really jumping up and down about it from one end to the other.
It's just what we were speaking of earlier.
Absolutely, and Pontotoc has great schools, but he makes my point, and it's going to happen again because we're passing the buck down to the local level, and it's foolish to say we're not raising taxes, because what in effect we are doing is raising property taxes, because the schools have to operate, and they're going to operate, and it's going to be off the property taxes. Basically what you're doing is limiting where the money's coming from, as opposed from coming from the state, whether it be sales taxes, individual income taxes. Our resources is a wider group of money available as opposed to property taxes. Fewer people own property across the state.
Let me point out, too, there are some school districts, including Jackson, which we represent, who can't raise property taxes.
Exactly.
We're at the cap.
Exactly.
And so when we pass it down, they don't have the ability to build it back up. So property taxes for school districts won't go up in Jackson. Just means we're going to have to cut classes and cut services to kids and cut more teachers than in other districts.
And another point to that, like DeSoto County, where the value of the property is going up because they're building new houses, new Walmarts are coming in, so they don't have to raise it because they have more property that is taxed. So you don't see that in Madison or Rankin because there's growth. So they can absorb that new growth. Whereas if it was coming to the state, they may either try to lower it. You know,
and you can see some school districts that have no property tax base at all, so they can raise taxes the allowed limit, and it won't produce any income for them. So if we cut from the state level, they don't have enough property tax base to raise enough money to make up the difference.
All right, let's go to the email now. Johnny from Ridgeland writes, do you have any programs for parents to help them stress the importance of education? Programs for parents to help, to help them stress the importance of education to their children.
It varies from district to district. In fact, I was meeting with the Department of Human Services right before I came out here, and we were talking about some programs they have in some of the lower performing districts where they have programs to deal with parents and try to encourage parents. That's a real problem. We've already pointed that out tonight. The engagement of parents and communities in the schools is at a very low level in many districts, and that's a real problem. It may be the biggest problem we have right now.
We have a question now that I'd like to ask. It's more about the programs that are offered in the schools themselves, education, the curriculum. We know that Mississippi leads the nation in teen birth rates. There's a House bill under consideration that would require local school boards to implement some form of sex-related education, whether it's an abstinence plus program or an abstinence-only curriculum. The bill that's now in the hands of the Senate Education Committee. What do you think the prospects are of a bill that requires some form of sex education?
I hope it passes. The bill that we passed it last year, we passed it again this year, requires every district to adopt either an abstinence education program, abstinence-only education, or what's called abstinence plus, which would be an expanded sex education program for kids. It requires one or the other. Right now, they don't have to do anything. It's a real problem in Mississippi. We've got the highest teen birth rate in the country. We've got the highest infant mortality rate in the country. They're related to each other. We've had hearings on this bill. Last year, the bill passed the Senate Education Committee and died in Public Health. And I think it's something, you know, we had testimony from the state health officer. We had testimony from people in the University Medical Center about this, parents. We had some teen mothers testify about this. It is an incredible problem in the state of Mississippi, and we need to do something about it. And just sticking our head in the sand and saying we're not going to do anything doesn't make any sense.
Well, the Senate committee has it right now. Gentlemen, what's going to happen with it?
I think we passed. Did we pass it out of committee last year? I believe.
Yeah,
that's right.
Absolutely.
That's right. So, you know.
Well, I served on this task force back in several months ago with Representative Mayo chaired the committee, and we looked at a number of different programs that are being used: abstinence, abstinence plus, and abstinence plus is abstinence and the use of contraceptives. And
where you teach that, you teach abstinence, and you teach
where you teach what each kind of contraceptive is and what it does and how to use it, and you know, and
that's where you get the division a lot of times in opinion, right?
You know, I'm a religious conservative, you know, but I have been all my life, back in my youth minister days when I was teaching True Love Waits to the kids, the abstinence program. The idea of bringing in contraceptives and showing them, you know, all that kind of stuff. Some people feel like that is encouraging kids to have sex, and we didn't want to be in the business of encouraging kids to have sex and showing them how to be safe from it in our public schools. But at the same time, we've got a serious problem, and it's not being addressed by abstinence-only curriculum. And so my concern through the whole process, because I really put a lot of thought into this, and I attended a teen pregnancy prevention seminar that the NCSL did over the summer. We have got to find ways to reduce teen pregnancy, or our kids' lives are just, they start off with two strikes against them. The babies grow up in poverty. Many times they grow up without a father. They grow up without hope. And my concern all along was, how would these things be taught? And exactly what would the teachers be doing? And would there be boys in one room and girls in another room? And you know, when I send my children to school, I want to know that what they're learning at school is in line with the values that me and my wife have. And so those are the kinds of questions that I had, and those are the kinds of questions that I ask in committee and through this whole process. And I think there is a way to do this in an appropriate way, that's age appropriate, that is gender appropriate, but we need to be very, very careful how we do it, because you know, there are many people across our state who, you know, didn't send their child to junior high or high school to learn about contraceptive use, and so it's important that this is handled with kid gloves.
But it's optional. The bill makes it optional.
Yeah, it's optional, certainly.
You can opt out. And also,
like a district could opt out? Is it
the parents can opt out.
You know, when it comes to that instruction or how they're going to put it in the curriculum, the parent can send in their notice that I don't want my child to be a part of this, so you can opt out.
Because presumably one would hope they're teaching about it.
And I believe we changed that to an opt-in provision last year in the Senate, where the parents had to opt into it, which made it which put the onus on the parents to sign if they wanted them to participate, not if they didn't want to.
It got amended in our committee this year to make it opt-out instead of opt-in. I don't feel strongly one way or the other about that.
I think we also said that they're going to be separate too. You brought up the issue about the genders. I think it's going to be all the boys together and all the girls together. I just want to quickly add something to that. I think it's paramount that we do something about sex education in our school districts. I speak at the schools in my district quite often. Just recently, 2 of my middle schools, I won't name them, but 2 of my middle schools, one of them had 12 6th graders. Not 7th graders, not 8th, but 12 6th graders that were expecting.
Wow.
Now that's a problem. That's a problem. And that is also tied to the parental involvement issue that we brought up earlier. You know, unfortunately, you're dealing with children that are coming from some homes, not all children, not all homes, and in some districts and some communities to where they're not being taught anything else anywhere else. So I understand where you're coming from. I agree. I mean, my husband and I, teach our children proper things, what we believe they need to be taught, things that are age appropriate. We're also Christians, and so we follow that line.
But every household is
But
different.
every household does not have that. And when you have 12 sixth graders that are expecting at one school, and I believe it was 8 at another school, and I know it's not just my district, that's a problem, because that does put you in the cycle of poverty, that puts you in the cycle of abuse, that puts you in the poverty, in the cycle of, you know, devaluing the community. Economic development again goes down. I mean, it's still a part of the bigger problem, and so we've got to start somewhere with helping these children.
We also have the highest incidence of sexually transmitted diseases in the country that can make young women infertile. We also
Or worse.
Or worse.
Or worse.
It can kill you.
Right.
And we also had language in we have language in the bill prohibits teaching abortion as a contraceptive method.
We do. We do.
So
And I
we
agree
are
with that.
clear on that. That's
Right.
All right, let's go back to the phone lines now. Cleothas from Leake County has a question for the panel. Cleothas, go ahead with your question, please.
Oh, my question is this. When a bad teacher leave one school, and if they having a problem, they just are forced to resign. And so the record that they did, if they molested a child or anything like that, it don't go forward to where they hire them again. So why don't somebody review some of these when they hire these people, and they are bad people? We get this student after we get this teacher after teacher come to our district really bad, and our board do a background check, but never really bring up the real reason why that person was fired from the last job. So why don't somebody at the state review some of these so we can stop this revolving door of just bad teachers? We got a whole school of bad teachers.
So is this something that's being addressed?
Well, it should be, and I mean that goes to a good administrator. And again,
Leadership.
I think you see good schools, you have good administrators and good teachers. And you know, I don't know where that specific school is, but if the superintendent's not obvious, if they need to be doing their job and making sure they're screening the applicants, doing a background check, and
Because if there was an offense that was bad enough, one would hope there were criminal charges.
well, yeah, and we
that
do
would
an
follow.
FBI background check on any employee anyway. So if they have a criminal record, that would show they can't be hired. They can't have a license to teach in the school.
But we just passed a bill a couple of weeks ago that dealt with this in the Senate Education Committee, and I believe this was one of Senator Carmichael's bills that the State Department of Education wanted, and I believe it deals with this.
And I guess what he's pointing out is that if there was an agreement maybe where there was an offense that perhaps, whether it could be proven or not, where they said, well, if you'll resign, we'll not sweep it under the rug, but then it doesn't follow, and that's his point. So if it's not something that's on the record, how do you do something about that?
Well, if any responsible superintendent that's hiring someone is going to call that district, and they're friends among each other, they're going to know. And I know that our superintendents do that, and the word gets around among the school districts. So
I would think any administrator would have a duty to share that if a teacher or coach was a sexual predator on these children, and I would think that they would be held responsible for not sharing that information.
The bill Senator Yancey's talking about had to do with inappropriate contact between students and teachers or administrators, anybody, and there is now that's a criminal offense to not report it.
That's right.
Yeah, we put that in the law. We studied it all summer, and they now have a code of ethics. Every teacher's on notice, every administrator's on notice, and the law, if this bill finally reaches the governor and is signed, it'll be a criminal offense to not make that report.
Because we've had an inordinate amount of in the past year or two. I mean, that have just been in the paper, and that doesn't include ones that haven't been captured by the paper. So.
It's a disturbing thought when you think of it in those terms. Less than 3 minutes to go on our program. Let's talk about kindergarten. Mississippi is just one of 12 states that have no state-funded pre-kindergarten program. It was a big fight to get kindergarten mandatory in this state many years ago. There are many programs created at the local level, but what's blocking an effort to establish state-funded pre-kindergarten on the state level?
Money.
Back to money.
Money's a big issue. Yeah, there's some opposition, just philosophical opposition. There's a lot of discussion about exactly what pre-K ought to look like and at what age you would start pre-K. And all those are a lot of important issues, but the biggest issue is money. It's just very, very expensive, and as we've all talked about, we've cut K-12 funding already, so the big issue right now is money.
Let's talk about consolidation of school districts. Aaron from Oxford writes via email, how much thought is being given to the consolidation of school districts? And Representative Brown, you were on the Commission on Education Structure last year. What were your findings? Do we have too many school districts in Mississippi?
No, the number itself doesn't really seem to make a lot of difference. The size of the school district may make some difference.
Because the argument that I've heard is that there are so many school districts with a very small number of schools, and you've got a superintendent for each one. You've got all these high-salaried folks. When you could consolidate that and perhaps be more efficient if you consolidate.
According to the information we were given in the commission, if you consolidated the 14 or 15 school districts that were targeted, if you will, you'd save maybe $14 million statewide. A lot of money, $14 million. But about 60% of that's local money, so you got about 40% of that would be state money, which would be about $6 or $7 million out of a $2.2 billion budget. And that may be worth doing, but you've got to realize a lot of those districts have elected officials, they have elected school board members, they have elected superintendents, so you've got to deal with all that, the Justice Department. And the real issue is, unless you shut down schools, you don't save a lot of money. I mean, you can save some money by eliminating administrators, but the big money is actually in the operation of school, and nobody wants to shut down their own schools. That's where we run into the problem.
But one of the things Cecil pointed out, we need to go to appointed superintendents across this state. We've played with the idea. We passed it in the Senate, and we haven't been able to get it passed through the entire legislature. But another problem with the schools is if you have 6 schools in school districts, and it's difficult to find somebody to teach physics in all 6 school districts. So maybe if you had only 2 school districts in that county, you could probably find 2 physics teachers. So those students are limited in the program offerings in that county, and that is a problem. So
we do have problems. It would be better to have, maybe 50. That might work out better. But getting there is a real problem. For example, different taxing levels between adjacent school districts. You may have one where you've got 40 mills and one where you've got 15 mills or 25 mills or 30 mills. Where are the lines going to be? It's a very complicated matter.
That conversation will continue.
It will continue.
That is all the time we have for tonight. I'd like to thank all our guests, Senators Lee Yancey and Gray Tollison, and Representatives Kimberly, Campbell, Buck, and Cecil Brown. We also thank you for joining the discussion. We'll soon have this edition of Quorum available for viewing online at mpbonline.org. Quorum returns next Wednesday at 7 with more coverage of Legislature 2011. I'm Wilson Stribling. Good night.